All right, so we're very lucky here tonight to be having a talk from Andrea O'Brien. Andrea is a municipal outreach and provincial registrar with Heritage NL. She's a graduate of Memorial University, where she completed a Bachelor of Arts focusing on folklore, history, Newfoundland studies, and English. She also has a Bachelor of Education and a Master's in folklore. She serves as Heritage NL's Registrar of Historic Places, Municipal Outreach Officer, and also Heritage Places Poster Context Coordinator, as well as Heritage Historic Commemorations Program Coordinator and Web Manager. She does it all. Andrea's involvement in the heritage sector also includes 8 summer seasons at the Colony of Avalon in Fairland and student employment at Memorial University's Folklore and Language Archives. I also want to note as well that she is a founding member of the board of the Mummers Festival. So her talk here tonight, Some Old White Guy Lived Here, is a culmination of a lot of her work. Heritage NL is a not-for-profit crown agency with which Andrea works, and it's established by the government of Newfoundland and Labrador in 1984. Heritage NL has a mandate to help preserve the rich heritage of the province. And in the beginning, this mandate was really focused on, large elite spaces and dealing with built heritage. Yet, one of the things that has been evident in Andrea's work and research is that the narratives that we tell about these places are often a bit more limited, and especially as they have been told, which brings us to the exciting subject of our topic tonight. And on that note, I just want to say a big thank you to Andrea for agreeing to be our speaker here this month, and to just take it away. Here we go. Thank you very much.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me tonight. I have to make 4 apologies. I have some kind of plague that I picked up like 10 days ago, so I'm sniffly, I can't hear properly. I'm not standing up because I might fall down because a bit of vertigo on the go, so I apologize for that. Also, this is a repeat of a presentation that I gave at the Fall Symposium, so for anyone who is there, you might have some material that you've heard before. Also, this is not a scholarly presentation. I stopped being scholarly about 30 years ago. This is more of a story of my experience through my employment and dealing with heritage buildings in the province. And fourthly, I apologize to old white guys. There's lots of old white guys in my life, and I love all the old white guys in my life. But it was a good title. You have to kind of admit that. So if you ask my boss about my interest in old buildings and the stories of the lives lived within their walls, he might describe it as more of an obsession than part of my job. I've been known to go down very deep rabbit holes in my attempts to place people from the past in these places. When I was first hired by Heritage NL in 2004, it was to research and write statements of significance for designated properties. And then these statements were uploaded to the Provincial Register of Historic Places, then on to the Canadian Register of Historic Places. 5 of us were hired for a summer to go through a backlog of hundreds of provincially designated registered heritage structures. At that time, the emphasis was very much on the architectural value of these buildings. But during our training on the associated values of heritage places, one suggested value field resonated with me, and that was how a historic building could embody a particular sense of a time and place. And it quickly became the office joke that the statements I wrote could easily be identified by the use of that particular qualifier. While I have great admiration for the techniques that are employed in the design and construction of heritage buildings, my passion for these buildings comes mostly from knowing the stories of the people connected to these places. And to be honest, the roots of my interest in uncovering untold stories, even those of women, can be traced back to the house that some old white guy built. That old white guy being my grandfather, Mr. Johnny O'Brien of Cape Broyle. He had this house built in 1914. He moved his parents, John and Anne, into the house, along with his adopted brother, Billy. Over the years, his twice widowed sister, Ellen, also lived there, as did his nephew, Francis. He lived here with his first wife, Manny O'Brien from Bay Bulls, who came to Cape Royal to teach and died from TB not long after they were married. He raised a family of 5 here with his second wife, Angela, the sister of his first wife, and it was also home to young women working there as domestics, one who married his adopted brother. His son, my father, raised his family there as well, making this place home to 4 generations over the 112 years since it was built. I never knew my paternal grandparents. Poppy O'Brien died 6 years before I was born. Nanny died 2 months after I was born. But the house was saturated with melancholy memories and stories of the people who were there before me. Melancholy because of who my grandfather was. He was an outport merchant, a fact that was often held against him, his wife, his children, and even his grandchildren, who were born after his death. As a child, most of what I knew about my grandfather came from others, remarks made by adults, to not believe what people said about my grandfather, that he was actually a good man, that some people stole from him and made a joke of it, that he wasn't the kind of man to take people off the books while other merchants were. When I was younger, my father didn't talk to me about these things, but when his siblings visited the house, I would sit out of sight on the stairs by the kitchen door, and I picked up enough to know that their experience growing up was not the outport ideal that's sung about on the Sunday morning Irish Newfoundland shows. So my passion for digging up information came first from a desire to know who my grandfather was, because no one in my family really spoke about who he was. I found out he was not born into money. He was in debt to Water Street merchants. He gambled and lost on a fresh fish processing venture in 1930s. He invested in a fish dryer just before the bottom went out of the salt fish market. His shop clerks were making more money per year than he was. He lost part of his premises to the same big sea that came into La Manche in 1966. He had no insurance. He died insolvent in 1967 with a ledger full of unpaid accounts that were never squared up. But people did not know that story. I was fortunate to have my maternal grandparents in my life until I was an adult. I spent hours at their kitchen being fed, playing cards, and just chatting. My grandmother, Monica Rice Rossiter, grew up in the same lane as my grandfather O'Brien. She worked in town as a maid before she was married. She was there the day Richard Squires was spirited out of the Colonial Building, and she told me a story about him that you would not include in any history books. You can ask me about it after if you want. When she married Matt Rossiter from Cape Royal, they had to live with her parents for several years after they were married because they didn't have their own house. They didn't have a house because they never intended on getting married. You can figure out what happened there. It was something she never talked about. Their first 2 children died in infancy. She was a patient at the sanatorium when the Knights of Columbus hostel burnt, and she watched the flames from the window on her ward. She was a fabulous singer. She loved to dance. Poppy Roster was a carpenter who often had to get by with hobbles. He left school after grade 3 and couldn't read or write, but he was one of the smartest men I ever knew, who conversed eloquently through stories that spanned generations. The educational and professional path that I ended up on, and the way I view history and heritage, was greatly influenced by these 2 very different family backgrounds. For almost 2 decades, I've been fortunate enough to have a job that continues to bring me to every corner of this province. I've seen almost every community from Nain to Rose Blanche. So many times I found myself looking through a stranger's attic at the bits and pieces of what people leave behind, the traces of lives lived. Nothing more than useless junk to some, but if you're otherwise inclined, they are the lines, verses, and unfinished poems of someone's story. Cradles that rocked babies to sleep, cases that held glasses worn to darn socks in the lamplight, shoes shined for Sunday church service, bedpans brought to the sick, a homemade mirror fashioned with whimsy and perhaps given as a gift, cellars that held a summer's labor and saw families through to the next harvest. Seeing these bits and pieces of other unknown lives is a melancholy racket at times, but it is also a privilege. And I have come to accept that it is my responsibility to make the unknown known, to give a name to the people who use these objects, to find out who lived and worked within the walls of the buildings we designate, to bring their lives out of the shadows and show who they were. So the Heritage Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador, also known as Heritage NL, is a not-for-profit Crown agency of the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, established in 1984. Its initial mandate was to protect and preserve the built heritage of the province through a designation and preservation grant program. Approximately 350 registered heritage structures have been designated by Heritage NL in the last 42 years. And since 2008, Heritage NL has also been entrusted with the implementation of the province's ICH strategy to safeguard and sustain our intangible cultural heritage for present and future generations. In this province of storytellers, the marriage of the built and the intangible makes sense. The value of our built heritage is intrinsically tied to the intangible heritage associated with these places. It is the intangible rather, that tells us why these places are important. By telling the stories of places, a greater affinity for buildings is fostered, along with a greater sense of stewardship. Without the intangible, these buildings are books with blank pages. Most of Heritage NL's early designations were buildings built by and for the elite. This was certainly the case in St. John's, where designations included mansions owned by merchants and politicians, and grand churches representing the seats of religious power for various denominations. And this pattern repeated beyond the overpass, where homes and premises owned by merchant firms and sailing captains were often the first to be designated as examples of the finest heritage architecture the province had to offer. So we end up finding these common, often male-centric themes amongst the earliest designations: ecclesiastical, mercantile, fraternal, and government buildings. And we also find that designations concentrated geographically in those areas where Europeans settled to prosecute the rich fishing grounds and where they established mercantile centers. In general, many early designations told the stories of successful settler men and their male descendants who had the means to build grand homes and institutional buildings. So if we look at designations made during the first 5 years of Heritage NL's designation program, which ran, the first year they designated was 1985, so I'm going to look from 85 to 89, this pattern becomes clear. All 4 designations in 1985, the first year designations were made, are related to mercantile history and are located in communities with historic connections to large mercantile firms. In 1986, we see the designation of more properties with mercantile connections, along with an Orange Lodge, a church, the house of a well-known man, Grenfell House, and 2 early settler homes. In 1987, we saw only 1 designation of a mercantile property, with the majority of designations that year being church properties. 1988 saw 22 designations in total. The majority were still related to mercantile history and religious institutions. And 1989 saw the designation of more religious buildings and mercantile properties, along with a Masonic lodge and 1 fisherman's home. It should be noted, however, that Heritage NL designates properties based on applications received from the legal owners. There's kind of a misconception that we have a magic wand that we can go out and designate whatever we want. That's not how it works. Owners submit application forms that they prepare themselves. The form asks owners to identify what they consider to be important in terms of the property's architecture and its history. Looking over the associated history section of many of these applications, and that's from back in 1985 right up to today, it becomes clear that the economic, social, and political position of the men who once owned these properties is considered most important in the majority of applications submitted. So that is what the people who own the properties see as being part of the value of that property. Here we see information submitted for Devon Place in St. John's, including a list of notable men who live there. And you can see in there, there's politicians, there's merchants, there's judges. And at one time also a score sheet was used to evaluate applications. And in this case, the person importance and person association fields both received top marks for the importance of the people that were associated with that building. While the owners assigned value based on the prestige of former owners, at this time also the judging applications use that status as a value qualifier. This example from the Robert Tilley House in Elliston, it mentions that most residents there dealt with the Tilleys and credits the family with helping build churches, establish the education system in the community, and even seeing that everyone got fed somehow. This example from Trout River shows that even applications for modest outport homes where there's nobody, of relative upper class status living there, still highlighted the male owners, going down through generations and mentioning only the male occupants. And as you will see later, one of the women who lived in this had a much more wonderful story to tell than any of these men that live there. Currently, out of the 350 properties designated by Heritage NL, barely 2% were designated solely for their connection to the women who lived or worked in them. And most of those were convents. As for the other 98%, women were usually not mentioned in application forms. They weren't named in the official title of the designation, nor were they included in many of the statements of significance that were written for the properties. When many of these statements were initially written, the main source of historical information that was used was the material that was contained in the designation package, so material provided by the owners. And while the types of properties being designated has evolved over time, much of the information submitted to this day remains very male-centric. Our efforts to uncover untold stories stems from our plaquing program for registered heritage structures. Our plaques have changed over 4 decades, but the information contained on them remained much the same over time. And here is one of the earlier versions, and the text on it highlights the male architect, the male owners, and associated merchant firms. This is the second type of plaque. This also had space for some text, but the content of the text would remain the same as the first generation of plaques. Then our third version of our plaques used only the name of the building. So in this case, there was no contextual information provided whatsoever. In 2018, a new plaque design was developed and new research was conducted on many of the previously designated buildings. But the information put on plaques continued to lean towards explaining the significance of the male owners. While in the process of editing this latest generation of plaques and looking for historical inaccuracies in statements of significance, the question was finally asked, why are so many of our designated properties named after men? And here's an example from Bonavista showing a collection of properties named after men: James Grove, Henry Tremblett, Adam Mouland, Samuel Abbott, and Dugald Templeman all had wives. They simply weren't recognized. Could we at least add women's names to those designation titles and plaques? That's how we started our ongoing Women in Heritage initiative, with the aim to tell the untold stories of the unnamed women who lived in these buildings. Women who ran businesses, who contributed to building community spaces, who broke societal norms, and who were forces for change. We began by asking property owners and known descendants for any information they might have. We appealed to the general public through our social media platforms. And we began to look up marriage records, baptismal records, census records, and cemetery records. Anything that could give a name to the women associated with the men whose names were on our designated properties. And we combed through online archives, a tool that wasn't available a few decades ago. We are slowly giving names to the unnamed, and women's stories are slowly coming to life. And in many cases, their stories are far more intriguing than the male-centered narratives written decades ago. So the first step is to actually name these women. And this is just a sample of some that we've gone through lately. On the left is what the house is called on our website, what it was called on the plaque. And on the right is what it's going to be called very soon when we get that off the side of our desk to get at work. Much thanks goes to my co-workers Juliet Lamphere and Tian Johnson for the work they have done in hunting these women down. Our online records will be updated as information is confirmed, and any new plaques for these buildings will contain these found names. This is an example from Tilting. The house had been called Martin Greenhouse and Outbuildings, even though it was built by Martin's parents, Lambert and Johanna Green. While we couldn't find out much information on Johanna, at least her presence is now recognized. And the Jacob Crocker House in Trout River that I'd mentioned earlier has been renamed the Jacob and, I always fool up this, Eloisha, I can't pronounce that name. Losh, they used to call her in Trout River, and I can understand why. So it's now been changed to include her name. And the thing about this too, when we were looking this up, Jacob died really young. He spent relatively little time in the house. She's the person who spent the most time in the house. And in updating the plaque, we noted her work in a cannery on the West Coast and on the SS Kyle as a stewardess after Jacob died. The names given to some properties may also say the same, but their associated statements of significance are being updated to include the women who lived and worked in these places. The Temperance Street houses in St. John's, also known as the Four Sisters, will include not only information about the builder, Samuel Garrett, who you see there in that picture with all the lovely women. He's the guy who built Cabot Tower. But you will also find information about his wife, Emma, and his daughters, Mary, Laretha, Emily, and Eliza, for whom he built the house. And you only see three daughters here. It's Samuel on the left and his wife on the right. You see three daughters because one of the daughters that he built the houses for died young, I think of TB as well. Another daughter was committed to what they called the lunatic asylum at the time and never left. She ended up dying in what would become the Waterford. So only two of those houses built for the Four Sisters were ever lived in by the Four Sisters. The other two were lived in by the grandchildren of Samuel. But that story will be told. The Randall House in Port Rexton will be known not only for the Randall sons, who were war heroes, sea captains, and explorers, but for their sister Mary Patience, fondly known as May, who also served overseas in World War I as a nurse, who taught school for several years around the province, who was a member of numerous community organizations and inherited the family home, and that's where she ended up dying. And the Thomas and Mary Jane Wells House in Little Bay will be known as the home of Fanny Wells, who traveled to the World Expo in England with her father, who socialized with opera singer Georgina Sterling, who turned down more than one suitor, who visited her family who had emigrated to Canada and the United States. You see she has a passport. She had several passports. She kept up lifelong correspondence with the people she met in her travels. She stayed in her parents' home and welcomed friends and family there all her life. And every generation of that family was hoarders. And she kept an incredible amount of archival material that needs to be handled somehow. Her father was a constable. Her father was involved in mining in central Newfoundland. There were several people who were, as I said, went away to the war. Some went away and were farmers out in the prairies. It's unbelievable amount of material. We have one collection that we call fan mail. It's all the correspondence that she got over the years. So these are the stories that these buildings have to tell. Bringing these women's stories to light is not a fast and easy process. It takes hours of research, and unfortunately, Heritage NL does not have a funded position to devote to this project. It is done off the side of all of our desks. To echo Margot Dooley's sentiments in her latest work, From Silence to Suffrage, this place, Newfoundland and Labrador, needs a solid commitment to the study of our collective history and to preserving records. Otherwise, we will not discover the stories of these women, let alone other diverse groups who are part of Newfoundland and Labrador, as the records of those lives will be lost. But Heritage NL is committed to getting these stories out one at a time. Going forward, women's stories will be researched for all new designations. Their names will be automatically included on plaques. Their lives and times will be included in statements of significance. And Heritage NL will continue to shine a spotlight on women in heritage, as we've done on our social media platforms and in a series of short video clips edited by my coworker, Tara Barrett. And I just want to show you a few examples of those videos that we have put together.
Naomi Burgess was born in Herstory, to Thomas Hannah. After her mother's untimely death, she had to raise her younger siblings. She met Henry Burgess in White in the early 1870s, and they married in 1872 and had 6 children. Naomi was a midwife who delivered babies, including her own grandchildren, in Great Harbor, White and Cavendish. In the winter of 1890, while pregnant, Naomi slipped and broke her right arm. Unable to obtain medical attention until after the spring thaw, her arm became infected and was amputated. After losing her arm, she continued to help with births by directing other midwives. She also continued to care for the plague and socks. When anyone in the family became ill, Naomi was the expert in traditional birth methods. In 1902, Naomi and Henry's phone caught fire while they were attending church. Unknown to anyone, Naomi entered the burning building, trying to save new beds and clothes belonging to their children. After the original home burned, the Burgess Registered Heritage Structure was built circa 1903. The current property includes the home as well as a fishing stage, stable, store, cellar, and sawmill. In 1934, Naomi passed away, leaving behind a legacy of grandfather. Louise Sims was born as Sloan in Kings Cove, Province of From 1913 to 1916, Louise played a piano accompaniment for Silent Hills and St. John's at the leading movie houses, including the Nickel, York, Star, and Little Star theaters. Louise remembers it was a pleasant occupation. I sat at the piano right below the screen, and there was an old horse-drawn and fast action, and play something fast. She never took her eyes off the screen. Sometimes during intermission, Louise would sing a song herself. She studied piano at Visitation Convent and wrote all of her Trinity College of music. Louise earned $5 for playing 6 days a week and became a well-known favorite in local games. She finished playing at the movies when she married William Sims of St. John's in 1916. The pair had 12 children and over 60 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. During the Second World War, Louise used to trade white flour that she had access to through the cooperage business for brown flour, which was rationed out. No one liked the ration brown flour, but Louise would use it to feed the horses that pulled carts from the cooperage. Louise and William lived across the street from 19th Pleasant Street and moved into the same house to register heritage structure in 1947 to the death of Henry B. Sims, William's grandfather. Located at 13 Northside Road in Williamsburg, it was built in 1917 by Eric Coughlin and first owned by merchant Uriah Creek. 4 years later, the house and business was purchased by Edgar Pellet. His wife, Myrna, though, had the most influence on the house. Born in Bare Need in 1900 to Elisha Bartlett and his band Batten, Myrtle was a gifted musician, and by age 14, the Anglican Church organ. At 16, Myrtle went home to teach. She taught across the island, including Lloyd's Cove, where she met Edgar Pelly, a merchant and veteran of World War I. They married in 1929 and moved into Pelly House. Myrtle received an organ as a wedding gift and loved education at home. She also became St. George's Church organist, where she played for 52 years. Myrtle taught music, crochet, fireworks, and enjoyed photography as a hobby. After the death of her husband in 1954, Myrtle became the matron at Bishop Jones Hospital in St. John. She held the position for 5 years before retiring. Myrtle returned to Boyd's Cove and operated Pelly House as a boarding home from 1974. Many prominent individuals, including doctors, magistrates, judges, welfare officers, and geologists, boarded in the home. In 1994, Myrtle passed away. Her funeral service was held at Boyd's Cove, where friends and families lived in Manhattan. Her 4 grandsons and 2 great-grandsons escorted her coffin down the aisle.
This was a bit loud, sorry.
73 to 77 Water Street were built by W&G Rendell after the Great Fire of 1892. Daughter of co-founder George Rendell, Margaret Alexander Rendell was the first Newfoundland-born professionally trained nurse and one of the first women in Newfoundland to have a driver's license. After the Rendells, J.B. Mitchell and Sons took ownership of the building. Anna Parnes Mitchell, wife of founder John B., was a suffragette. The Votes for Women campaign was founded in the Mitchell's living room. Their petition gathered 1,700 signatures. The petition was thrown out of Parliament, and Mitchell was told to go home and learn to bake bread. Continued action by suffragettes like Anna led to Newfoundland women's right to vote by 1925.
So I'll leave you now with this picture by photographer Eugene Howell that hangs in my office. It was taken in an abandoned house on the north shore of Conception Bay, and that house has since been torn down. When I need a break from my workday, I imagine the life that was lived in that room, from sex to childbirth to death, under a blanket made with her own hands, enveloped in that lovely mid-20th century pastel green paint on the walls. Someone who crafted a space filled with the optimism of spring, perhaps to ease the bite of winter's annual grip on that windswept shore. And if you look closely to the left, you can see hair messed up from sleep, the strap of her nightgown slipping from her shoulder, and she is still there to remind us of who she was. Can you see her? And that's my presentation.
Well, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. I know you're a little under the weather, but do you have a bit of time for a few questions? Oh, that's wonderful. For those of you who have joined us online, I want to encourage you to post any questions you've got for Andrea in the chat. We'll get to you shortly, and I'll get started with folks here in the room. So if you'd like to put your hand up, I'd be happy to come to you with the microphone.
Hello, my name's John Joy, and I was interested in Fanny Wells because one of her relatives, Doyle Wells, is currently working on a 2-volume book, maybe you know about this, of Magistrate Thomas E. Wells.
Fanny's father.
Yes, and we're going to publish, the DAISY Committee is going to publish these 2 volumes of the court records that run from his time as a magistrate from 1909 to 1914. He served longer than that, but but the photographs that you have there and the information about her are really quite interesting, and we're working on an introduction to that, and we'd probably like to include some of that material in that book. Okay.
So I went out there. That is one of our newest designations, is the Wells House. And I went out there last fall because it was 3 generations of hoarders. But the information they have in there is incredible. He kept a diary a personal diary and a professional diary from the time he was first a magistrate in Twillingate until the day he died. And they have all of that information. Some of it is in the rooms that that his grandson had used for the first book that he wrote about his grandfather.
Well, he's just donated almost his entire collection to the rooms.
What was in the Thomas Wells house that they had managed to salvage when I went out in the fall was about 12 bankers' boxes full of stuff. And there were still probably half a dozen steamer trunks that they haven't even gone through. He had information on the mines. They kept everything. Like absolutely nothing was thrown away. What we call the fan mail, that alone could be a book. The amount of photographs that they have is absolutely unbelievable, and it shows mining activities in central Newfoundland. It shows where a lot of the sons moved away to different parts of Canada and the United States. It's like a treasure trove of information. And you drive by and it's just this little, modest looking house. I couldn't believe what was inside. Yeah, so if you want to contact me, God only knows what's in some of the pictures. We have scanned some, and we're going to eventually put them on Monday AI.
Well, the collection that Doyle put into the rooms recently, I mean, it fills at least half a dozen bankers' boxes. Mm-hmm. But that's just the journals of him as a policeman and as a magistrate, and also as a relief officer.
Yes, he was the guy who gave out the dole.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, thank you so much. I also am selfish and I have a question. I want Squire's story.
I don't know if I should say that. Well, I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a perk, see?
when the recording stops, I'll tell you. I don't think my nanny would want me telling that on recording. Although I have her recorded saying it. No, I will tell it when the recording stops.
All right, we got to respect Nan. That's very fair. All right, I'll hold you to it though. All right, does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask? I just want to take one quick question as well. Do we have any, to the technician in the back, do we have any questions online? So Jim has asked, for those of us, just so everyone here can online, the question, Andrea, when did J.J. O'Brien pass away?
My grandfather?
I think that's, yeah, I think so.
1967. So he's not to be confused with R.J. O'Brien. Cape is full of O'Briens. R.J. O'Brien was another merchant, and his father, whose name was also J.J. O'Brien, was a merchant. J.J. O'Brien, that's why in my grandfather's thing, you'll see how he distinguished himself. He was J.J. O'Brien Seaview. That's how he distinguished himself from the other J.J. O'Brien, who was just J.J. O'Brien.
Andrea, thank you for this. I love it. I so badly want to go and get the fan mail right now. I'll leave here and drive out there. What's going to happen to that collection?
So I took the fan mail when I left because this is a very small heritage organization with very small resources. They have no archival background or archival training. So I told them I would take the fan mail and we would properly handle it and we would do the metadata for it. And if we can, we'll scan it. So there's digital copies and then we send it back to them and here's what to do with the thousands of other things that you have. So I'm going to go out there again this summer and go through some of their collection with them again. With the fan mail, I'll document it and done so they can see what needs to be done. And I don't think they're ever going to be able to do it on themselves. I'm going to encourage them to actually hire somebody who can do a lot of that work for them because it is a fantastic collection that they have.
I want to take a second as well to note that there are a bunch of thank yous to Andrea coming in from the chat online, just acknowledging how great of a presentation. There's some folks mentioning, knowledge in their own families of women and their work in various houses and stuff. For example, someone's posted that their grandmother had worked as a domestic in the Randall house. And just, to note that like this type of history, it touches so many of us, right? It's all pieces of our own lives and stuff in this province. We do still have a little bit of time, though, if there is any other questions while we have Andrea. Oh, perfect. Wonderful. Oh, Dale, I think we might guess who that might be. Great presentation. I really like it might not be, but great presentation. I really like the addition of the women in these buildings. What has been the hardest maiden name to track down thus far?
Which has been the hardest to track down?
Yes. What's the hardest maiden name to track down?
That list that I showed you, for most of these, most of those there, we may only have found additional information on a quarter of those. Most of those names, it's getting them from census material, and there's no kind of additional information. We just know who that guy married, and we don't have any actual information, personal information on her. I did show at the end some stuff. This is something that Tian Johnson did lately because Tian was updating that list. So she went and actually contacted people who own some of these properties, and they provided information about women connected to buildings that we knew nothing about. So in this case, this lady from Greens Pond, the house had been named the Hector Carter House, I think. Well, now it's going to be Hector and Gertrude. And there's Gertrude with her hens. She was known for her textile skills. She kept sheep. She spun the wool. This in the middle, that's one house that was designated purely because of its connection to a woman. That's Nurse Myra Bennett. The other one we hear is one of the Mifflin's Virtue. I love the names that they gave people years ago. Virtue Mifflin, who was a fisher from Bonavista. And you see, she ran a tea room in the house. So that's an important thing to put in, that she ran a tea room in the house. But for that list that I showed you, it is difficult sometimes to get any kind of information. A lot of times these houses are probably now at their 6th or 7th owner. So the owner that's there now, they don't have a clue about who this woman would have been. A lot of times they don't have a clue what the woman's name is even, so there's 350 properties. A lot of those pose a challenge to try to find information about the women associated with them.
All right. Well, I think one of the things that is one of my biggest takeaways, though, from the night is how much Heritage NL, and particularly your work, and I know you have excellent coworkers as well, have risen to that occasion. And just, I think on behalf of like us with the Historical Society, a big part of having, being so grateful for you coming to speak is to share how much work this all is, how important it is, and the exciting progress and updates for, that are coming. And so on behalf, I think, of everyone, I just really want to thank you for the work that you do and your dedication to all of this, and to thank you so much for being our speaker this evening. And
I just want to mention one more thing.
Oh, please go ahead. Last note.
We took over the Provincial Commemorations Program 2018, maybe. Before Heritage NL took it over, not one topic related to women was commemorated. And since we took it over, we've made it our mission to fill that page up with not only women, but other diverse stories from Newfoundland. So we did a very deep dive into Lebanese immigration to Newfoundland and the Lebanese business community. And that program depends on submissions from the public. Again, we just can't go out and designate something or commemorate something for the sake of doing it. So we want people to send in those diverse stories that are missing from the history books and are missing, in other public ways.
What about the gap between built heritage and intangible heritage? what about the heritage surrounding the buildings? For example, in the case of the former estate, the place on Battery Road where Penny Alderdice, that Penny Alderdice made famous after it was already made famous by somebody else. I mean, why would Heritage NL or whoever else not consider that that acreage
So
and the trees on it and that sort of thing to be unbuilt heritage? I mean, it's not exactly the same as natural heritage, but it's in between the built and the intangible.
So Heritage NL is governed by the Historic Resources Act, and in the Historic Resources Act, we can only designate things that are built. Municipalities can designate more than that. And actually, if Heritage NL designates a building, there's no protection on it. We can't legally stop an owner from doing anything. Even if they've signed an easement on that property, they can tear down that building, and we have yet to go to court and fight an easement. The true power to protect heritage places, including all, is through municipalities. Municipalities can designate buildings, structures, and land. And I heard something today that was false. Municipalities can impose designation on places. People in municipalities can apply for a place to be recognized, but municipalities, that's what I do as one of my jobs as a municipal outreach officer. Municipalities can have a meeting, get heritage regulations in place and say tomorrow, this place is designated. The house shall not be torn down. The land shall not be built upon. So that is totally in the power of municipalities to do that. As our organization, the way we work under the Historic Resources Act, we accept designations from the public. Those applications are then reviewed by a selection committee, then they're approved by a board. In some cases, we have designated houses and the surrounding built features. So cellars, outbuildings, rock walls, fences, all those things can be designated. I don't think we've ever designated just land. I don't think we're allowed to. Shane? No. You used to be on that years ago? I don't think just land, except we have designated cemeteries that were attached to a church. We've designated walls, we've designated bridges. It has to be a built structure. That's how we operate under Historic Resources Act. But again, even if we designated a place, it's no protection. It's commemorative, and we kind of trust the owners not to shag it up. The people who really have the power to protect are municipalities. They can put stop work orders in place, and they can say what can and cannot happen on the property. And many municipalities need to do architectural inventories, heritage architecture inventories. Some municipalities that shall remain unnamed have never done one, ever. So there's things being torn down in some municipalities from all different types of eras, all different types of examples of architecture, and they are getting bulldozed. But it's in municipalities' power to say that's designated, if the owner likes it or not.
Can I ask you a quick question, just clarification? So there's Municipalities Act, and then the City of St. John's and Mount Pearl have their own.
Yep.
Are they identical powers? Does the city have anything different, or is it the same legislative framework?
I would have to look at all of them individually, but most of them, the language that I've seen is that the municipality has the power to designate building structures land as municipal building structures land, and they shall not be altered, demolished, built upon. So,
That's really,
but I would have to look up the specific act to see what it says.
yeah.
And that's part of what I do is I help municipalities write heritage regulations that they can then adopt.
That's in my regular life. I'm a legislation person, so it's really, really interesting.
And
to
now
me.
we're most of the towns I deal with, they did it under the old Municipalities Act, and now it's the new Municipalities and Local Services Act. So now I have to get all them to update, but it's still in effect as far as I'm aware of the previous legislations that they would have written.
I think one of the big takeaways there is that that's where power sits. So if there's something you know and you're passionate for, advocate to your local town council,
Yeah.
to the city council and stuff. That's where that kind of authority.
We often get blamed and people say, oh, you're not doing anything. It's like, we can't do anything. It's not designated by us. And even if it was, there's not really a whole lot we can do. We can give them money to fix it up, but our powers kind of end there.
Just kind of to add to that, that has been tested in the courts that the municipalities can designate things because that's what happened with Bryn Mawr before it burned down, and that was a landmark case, but that had nothing to do with Heritage NL. That was purely on the city.
Yep. And before that, if you remember the tearing down of the steeple in St. Philip's, there was the Anglican church in St. Philip's that they wanted to, the community group wanted to take it over. The town had designated that against the wishes of the Anglican church. I've ran into so many towns saying, the church says we don't have permission. I said, I don't care if they're a church or not. They can't tell a town what to do. If the town wants to designate, they can designate. So the town had designated that building. It was brought to court. And they said in court, if the town had not had heritage regulations in place, then it could have been challenged, but they had heritage regulations in place. They went through all the proper procedures. And then I think after the steeple was torn down, the town kind of decided, well, do we want this to be a public relations nightmare? They're never going to agree. But again, it's up to the town what decision the town wants to make on those matters. And a lot of times it comes down to the political will of the people who are sitting on council. Because one council might have adopted something 10 years ago, a new council might decide that that's not what they want to do. But on the books, it's still there, that places are designated and protected.
Thank you for your presentation. So you mentioned that there's a Lebanese community here. So I'm Lebanese myself, and I'm really interested to know more about how extensive the community here in Newfoundland is.
It is very extensive. The Lebanese immigrants who came here started coming around the late 1800s. A lot of them were business people. A lot of them started out as kind of traveling peddlers, traveling merchants. And they ended up establishing in a lot of the newer kind of industry towns that were in Newfoundland, Labrador. So they were out, they started in, a lot of them were in St. John's and had stores along New Gower Street, especially, where City Hall and Mile 1 is now. That was basically a Lebanese community there at one point. They were out in Bell Island with the mines, in Grand Falls with the mill. They followed around industry out in Corner Brook with the mill. As part of the project, Lorraine Michael, who was once ahead of the New Democratic Party in Newfoundland, she made the nomination. And normally our nominations are like 3 or 4 page write-up. We got so much information, it turned into a book. The book is available online. You can order the book, and that tells the stories of different families that came here. A lot of families you won't recognize now as Lebanese names because they anglicized their names, but they still have a lot of food traditions in their family that are Lebanese. There's a lot of music traditions, so a lot of that kind of still lives on, even though now you're probably looking at 4th or 5th generation at this point, depending on how fast people had children. But it was a very big community, and it was a Christian community. And so when they came here, a lot of them became Catholic. Because they were Catholic. I'm forgetting the exact name now. I'm such a bad Catholic. Yes. So when they came here, they kind of melded in with the Catholic community. So they went to Catholic schools. A lot of them became priests. A lot became nuns. So there are a lot of their connections that they made in Newfoundland were with Catholics that were in Newfoundland.
And what's the website where we can find it for the book name?
So if you go on our website, heritagenl.ca, and you go under programs, I gotta remember all this off the top of my head, and then go under Discover. Then you go under Provincial Historic Commemorations Program. And when you scroll down, you'll see Lebanese Business Community. when you click on Lebanese Business Community, you'll see the link to the book in there. So it's a book that you order online. They're printed kind of as wanted.
I think someone has also kindly put that link in the chat for the
Excellent.
WebEx as well. If anyone wants to pop that open, I believe, yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up from the tech there. So they put the link there. And yeah, I mean, the
It's
resources
called,
on
yeah, it's called
Heritage.
The Establishment of the Lebanese Business Community in Newfoundland is the name of the book. It's a lot of them are articles, some articles that our staff research, some articles that descendants of the Lebanese immigrants wrote. There's one mapping section in there that shows where Lebanese businesses were located in St. John's. I mean, it could have been bigger, but at some point we kind of had to stop because we never have the commemorations. We just keep going and going and going. But it was one of the biggest commemoration events that we had. We had Lebanese caterers came in, and all these descendants of the Lebanese immigrants were there. It was fantastic.
I'll just make a general plug to just check out Heritage's website. It's incredible, the resources, the things you can learn. Like, just as a general plug, I think what we've learned here tonight from Andrea and stuff is, just really speaks to just the incredible work done by that organization. Yeah. So we're coming to a bit later on in our evening, so I will take one last call if there's anyone. We've had a great discussion. I love the discussion about the acts and legislation and stuff and how we can all be advocates. I think that's great, important. And so I just again want to thank you so much, Andrea, and just turn it over to you if you've got any final words you'd like to say. And
No, just thank you for having me here tonight. Thank all of you for listening to me.